Can you trust the Bible? If you're asking that question, you came to the right place. And that's such a great question to ask. We're glad you're here. And this is part of the top objections to following Jesus. Now, what is the Bible? Is it really trustworthy? Is it historically reliable? And so forth. That's what we're talking about today. Thank you for joining us. Johan, good to have you here. So how do you think we should start tackling that question today?
Yeah, it's a big question to tackle. So the way I think we should do it is to look at the top objections, okay? So the first objection to the accuracy of the Bible would be, do we really know when the Bible was written and who wrote it? Then secondly, I want us to look at the copying process. So people question the reliability of the Bible because they say, oh, it's been copied so many times from different languages and stuff like that.
Translation.
Yes. So let's look at that. And then thirdly, people bring up, oh, there seems to be some inconsistencies in the Bible, especially in the Gospels. So let's take a careful look at that. And then lastly, one of the big objections is that, oh, but the Bible contains miracles. So of course it's false. So the issue that people have with miracles in the Bible. So yeah, let's look at those four. Do you want to start off? And
good question.
Let's talk about the first one.
Okay.
About who wrote the Bible and when it was written. What can you tell us?
Yeah, good question. I think first thing is the Bible is not just a book, but it's actually a library of 66 different books.
Yeah.
And they were written from about 1400 before Christ, around the time of Moses, who wrote the first 5 books of the Torah, to about 100 AD at the latest. Most people agree. And this is 66 different books from 40 different authors at least.
Yeah.
And all of them, the most amazing things when I read the Bible is they all come together so perfectly. True. One coherent story inspired by God. Yeah. That's incredible.
Okay, obviously we can't take a look at all of those 66 books.
That's right.
Let's focus on the 4 Gospels. And the reason is because Christianity really focuses obviously on the life and Jesus, who Jesus was. So I think it's crucial that we look at the Gospels, who wrote them and when were they written.
Yeah, good question. I mean, a lot of people just assume, well, they were written hundreds of years after the fact, and you can't really trust them to give us an actual historical Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all totally lies. Because if you actually look into each one of them, they claim to be historical, reliable accounts, biographies.
Eyewitness accounts
and biographies of Jesus's life. Starting with Matthew, then we have Mark, Luke, John, the first 4 books of the New Testament, those 4 Gospels. And the time it was written was within a few decades of Jesus' life, where many people are still alive who knew Jesus, who saw what he did, who saw his death, and also many who saw his resurrection, according to the Bible, and who could have called out, if they're
objected.
just making stuff up. Like, no, this makes no sense.
I knew Jesus.
He never said this.
He
claimed to be God.
Yeah, he never died on a cross or rose on a grave. They would call it out, right?
Exactly.
Because there were many enemies of Jesus as well. Right. The Romans, the Jews. Yeah,
that's for sure. Yeah. And if you look at each one of those and their lives in particular, like Matthew, the tax collector who Jesus called, he obviously knew how to write. And he was there with Jesus, one of the 12, watching everything he said, everything he did. And he wrote it down clearly for us to understand. Mark, not necessarily an eyewitness, but very close to this, to Apostle Peter, was one of the most important of the 12 and really knew what went on with Jesus because he was there.
Yeah.
Another one is Luke, who gathered all these different testimonies of the life of Jesus, maybe though he was not an eyewitness himself, but very close companion of Paul.
Yeah,
right.
And he says that he investigates these things.
That's right.
Interviewing people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, to make an orderly account for Theophilus. And then we have John as well, my favorite, who perhaps the closest disciple of Jesus and who was there every moment pretty much of Jesus' ministry, very closely knowing what happened to Jesus and who he really was.
Yeah.
Those are the four Gospels.
Yeah. So just to conclude, what's the dating then that we put these four Gospels in?
I think all four of them are somewhere between 40 AD to 100 AD.
And if you compare that to other historical events or people of the time, how does that compare? Is that a long time after them, or?
Yeah, no, that's incredibly early date actually for the Gospels as biographies of the life of Jesus.
Yeah.
Where usually they were written after the person died, and usually only for people like emperors or very important people that had scribes to write about their lives, such as Emperor Tiberius, for example. The emperor at the time of Jesus. He had four main biographies written about him, but most of them were written in 125 AD. And
Much later.
Even later than that. There's even one in the 3rd century out of those four.
Yeah.
And so really we have an incredible 4 different perspectives, 4 accounts of Jesus' life that are incredibly early.
We can already see that obviously they thought it very important to write these things down, because back then it was expensive to write things down, because not everybody was literate. It wasn't just like pop out a computer. It was a long, timely process. So that's very interesting. Tell me, what about some of the other Gospels that we hear about that didn't make it into the Bible?
Oh, I mean, we could keep talking about those as well, but the main reason they didn't make it is usually they are claimed to be written by authors that really...
like Barnabas.
Exactly, like
Peter.
Gospel of Peter, Gospel of Judas, but there's zero evidence to that matches that we could believe and trust that it actually came from those authors. Yeah. That's why we don't put them in the Bible.
Yeah, they often date them much later as well. Yeah,
like Gospel of Barnabas, I'm pretty sure it was written by Muslims.
Yeah,
and over 1,000 and a few hundred years, I think in the 1500s century after Jesus. And
yeah, I think there's some mention in there that Jesus traveled by boat, but then when they actually look at the locations he's traveled at, it's actually a landlocked location. So it's like stuff like that. Like you can tell, like the person who wrote it, it wasn't from that time.
More like myths and fables after the time of Jesus that were not historical at all. Yeah. That's why they weren't included in the canon of Scripture.
Let's move on to the next one. Looking at the copying and translation process of the Bible. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, great question. Well, first of all, the incredible thing about the Bible and the New Testament in particular, if you look at the New Testament alone, there's over 5,800 manuscripts in Greek, the original language of the New Testament, that have been passed down and copied and distributed all over the earth. It's spread like wildfire. And we have those to this day, and new ones keep getting discovered more and more. And the thing is, if you can compare all of them, you can get down to what did the original authors actually say, even though they were copied by hand, obviously, so there might be 1 or 2 spelling errors. But if you compare all of them, you can get 99%. They all say the same thing. The main message can't be corrupted, and we can actually be very, very close to the original message of the Gospels. Even, I believe it is said that the New Testament manuscripts, it's the best preserved ancient text when it comes to quantity and proximity to the original writings. There's even almost 20,000 manuscripts besides those Greek manuscripts in other languages as well.
Yeah, people have this very wrong idea, but it's very popular, this idea of the game of telephone, that the Bible is passed down from one person to the next, generation, each time getting changed a little bit based on that previous generation and stuff. But actually it's this picture of many copies was made from the original, and from those many copies, some copies were made. But then when you compare all the copies and they all say exactly the same, obviously we can confidently conclude that we have the original message intact.
Even the Dead Sea Scrolls is incredible. Just now we discovered them. I think 1947 and they were so much older than like Isaiah, right? Weren't you talking about that?
Yeah. They found the book of Isaiah as part of the Dead Sea Scroll library, and it was 1,000 years older than the previous version we had, and it came from a completely different place. So naturally, they were very curious when they, to compare them and see, look for differences. And the amazing thing is that it was word for word exactly the same.
Wow, that's incredible. So we keep finding older manuscripts that confirm that the ones we have were never really changed.
Yeah.
Wow,
Incredible. We're ready to move on to the next one?
Yeah, next question.
So this one is a big problem for people. They point out that there's inconsistencies in the Bible. And once again, let's focus on the Gospels because we really want to get to who Jesus was in the life of Jesus. So, do you have some thoughts on those inconsistencies?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, when you think of there's 4 different peoples writing the same story, they're obviously going to have a different perspective. And some things are going to be slightly different. And for example, I think one inconsistency that people point out, they say, well, they all have a different version of the resurrection story and the empty tomb. When, the women came to the tomb, right? Well, tell me a little bit about that one.
Yeah, I'm not doesn't know all the details 100%, but I know that Matthew mentions 2 women.
Right.
Mary is one of them. And then you have Mark also mentioning Mary, but 2 other women.
So it's 3 total.
3 total. And then you have Luke just saying, there was a group of women who came to the tomb, which is probably also correct. And then you have John who only mentions Mary. Yes.
So people say, well, they can't all be right. One of them.
Yeah. Which one is wrong? Yeah.
Or they're all fake because they're all making it up.
Yeah. So how I would explain it is, for example, say you and me go to somebody's birthday party and we go home and your mom, asks you about the party and my mom asks me about the party. We're going to have some similarities, but it's not going to be exactly the same. For instance, we'll both agree on whose party it was, how old they turned, where it was, stuff like that. But when it comes to the people who was there, maybe you'll include some of your friends that you're really close with and your mom knows. The same with me. I might include some other people, maybe I had conversations with other people than you did. Yes. So, it's not really inconsistencies. In fact, it really strengthens the case that the Gospels weren't copied. We don't get this picture of 4 guys who sat together and copied each other's work. It's really people who wrote their own individual accounts of what happened, the way they got it from all the facts and all the research that they did.
From their own independent sources and their own experience and their own how they remembered it. And even it goes even further. I think this is a terrible example, but one of the biggest ones they say is an inconsistency. But if you look closely, every time you find these inconsistencies disappear in the Bible. And even if you look closer, it further strengthens the argument for the historical reliability of the Gospels. Because, for example, even the fact that it was women who went first to the tomb is incredible.
Yeah,
if you think about the culture. Bro, think about the culture of the time where women were not even heard in a court.
Yes.
Like no one would
testimony wasn't valid.
Exactly, man. Yeah. No one would believe the testimony of women. Yeah. Now, how much less when it comes to someone raising from the dead?
Yeah.
They wouldn't have made this up. This would have been a terrible idea.
Yeah,
they would write the story.
Yeah. They would put the main guys in the finding the tomb, like Peter and John,
they only came after.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. They call it the embarrassing facts argument. Yeah. There are so many embarrassing facts about the heroes, the disciples in the Bible. Like they didn't understand what Jesus was saying.
Peter is the worst, man. Yeah. He was the supposed leader of the apostles, the great man upon whom the church was built. The whole early church knew he was the leader.
Yeah.
But then you look at the gospel accounts, he was such a moron, man.
Yeah.
He's like so stupid and keeps messing up, and he denies Christ 3 times. Like, who would write that about himself or allow his friend to write that unless they wanted to say, hey, we need to
Yeah.
tell the whole truth, because it's not about us.
Yeah.
It's about Jesus, a real man who rose from the dead,
Yeah.
and people need to know this.
Yeah. And that's why non-Christian historians believe the Gospels as well, because they know in history when people make up stories that, they make themselves always look really good. And that's not what the disciples did.
Wow.
Okay, let's move on.
What's the last one?
The last one is the miracles one. Okay, so people say, obviously, no, the Bible can't be true because there's miracles in it, and we all know miracles don't happen.
Well, I think that's a fallacy in itself, asking that question, because first of all, the worldview of people at the time, especially, and still to this day, many people believe in miracles, and at the time even more so. And it was literally a part of human life and even history at the time. It was always included some kind of miracles in many cases, not just the Bible, but historical ancient texts.
Yeah.
But when you look closely to the person asking this question, really they're assuming the worldview of supernatural things are possible. They're already assuming that has to be false before they approach the Bible.
Yes.
And so it makes it really impossible to look at the Bible as a text with no preconceived bias.
Yeah, to really look at it objectively, because
Exactly.
you're coming in with a preconceived idea
Right.
that it already has to
And
be
you
false.
can't
Yeah.
prove that miracles can't happen.
Yeah.
So you're coming with a preconceived idea.
In fact, coming to that, you can't prove that miracles
Yeah.
can't happen. Let's talk about science for a moment.
For a second.
Yeah, because everybody now knows, scientists all agree that the universe had a beginning, calling it the Big Bang. It's a fairly recent discovery. They used to believe that, the universe was infinite. But now everybody agreed that the universe had a beginning. So you get this idea of the vastness of the universe expanding. So if you go back in time, you get the idea of the universe shrinking. Scientists say the whole universe fitting inside the head of a needle. Can you fathom that? But it doesn't stop there. Then that needle gets smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where it literally disappears.
It is nothing.
It's nothing. So in science, we have this agreed upon theory that everything came from nothing.
That's impossible. Scientifically impossible.
No, this is science.
Right. It's a miracle.
Nothing turning into everything. This is like what all the scientific minds of our time is agreeing on. But then people will say, oh, but it's impossible for water to turn into wine. It just seems a little bit, it just seems a little bit, fallacious. Like,
I agree.
let's take the Bible for what it is and look at what it says without coming with preconceived ideas.
Wow, yeah, that's such a good point. And so now that we've refuted some of these questions and claims that, well, you can't trust the Bible because of this, let's give some positive evidence for why you can trust the Bible. So not only disproving that you can't trust the Bible, these reasons, but now giving some evidence to help people believe in the Bible.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Okay, can I start us off with one
course,
of my
let's
favorite ones? It's fulfilled prophecies.
Oh,
Okay.
that's huge.
That's huge. Okay.
So many.
So it's basically the idea of a prophecy is somebody in the past saying like, this is going to happen in the future.
Right.
And then it happens. Okay.
Because God told him.
Yeah, because God told him. Yeah. So one of my favorite examples is in Isaiah 53. So this prophet, 700 years before the life of Jesus, he foretold the death, the crucifixion of Jesus in a time where crucifixion wasn't even a thing yet.
Well, can you read me a
Yes.
verse or two?
Yeah. So 53 verse 5 says, but he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be made whole. He was whipped so we could be healed.
Wow.
And if I read this to people in the street and ask them who they think it's about, they all say, oh, it's obviously about Jesus, not knowing that it's actually not New Testament.
Wow.
This was actually
Written.
already written in the Torah, the Jewish Torah, and yeah,
That's incredible. And that reminds me Psalm 22 as well.
yeah,
I mean, this is even further back, go 300 more years, so 1,000 years before Jesus, at the time of King David. He wrote this in the Psalm. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? These are the exact words Jesus quotes
wow,
on the cross
yeah,
when he's being crucified. And then he proceeds to detailed description of the crucifixion. Again, crucifixion didn't exist at the time. Look at verse 16. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones.
wow,
What does this mean, man? At the time, 1,000 years before crucifixion is invented,
yeah,
the exact way that the Messiah would die. And even they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. And the gospel accounts tell us exactly how that happened. And the Roman soldiers taking his clothes. It goes so deep, man. It even says, and my tongue clings to my jaws in verse 15, talking about thirst. How Jesus was thirsty when he was on the cross, and he said, I thirst. And someone offered him sour wine to drink. Bro, it's incredible.
Yeah, I've got one more in verse 9 from Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
It says that he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave.
Oh, bro.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, shows up to Pilate and says, hey, can I have Jesus' body and bury him in my new tomb?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's incredible. It speaks of the divine inspiration of the Bible. Yeah.
And that's just one of many fulfilled prophecies. I mean, I could go on for days, man, talking about Israel returning to the land. This is prophesied in Ezekiel, in Isaiah 11, and Jeremiah 31. God will bring them back to the land, and they will become a nation again. They will be born or reborn in a day. And that's what just happened, 1948. It's incredible. And further, Cyrus is one of my favorite prophecies. Yeah. This is many years ago. It's, I don't know, 3,000 years ago or something. And, or less, slightly less. Cyrus was prophesied by name, again by Isaiah, 150 years before he didn't even exist yet. Wow. He wasn't even born. Yeah. And God says, I'm going to raise up Cyrus, my servant, who will decree for Israel to go back, and for Jerusalem to be rebuilt and the temple to be built. And Israel is in captivity of Babylon at the time. And what happens 150 years later? A king called Cyrus comes in, and he's a king of Medo-Persia that takes over the Babylonian Empire from under which the Jews are captives. And he decrees, hey, Jews, go back to your land for no reason, apparently, and says, hey, go rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. And that's described in Ezra and Nehemiah in the Bible.
Man,
it's incredible.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Like, nobody could have just made a guess.
Yes, his name, bro. Every time I read that, I'm like, there's no way. Yeah. And I could go on talking about Daniel 2 and 7, the empires. Oh, my God.
So there's so many prophecies. The Bible is full of it. But I think let's move on to the next one. Archaeological evidences. Do you want to start us off? Yeah, with the Cyrus.
I think Cyrus is another great example. So that prophecy seems so unlikely that would happen. And an emperor that has his captives Jews there would just randomly say to them, hey, go back. I don't need you anymore. That historians for the longest time say that couldn't have been possible. The Bible is wrong. That never really happened. Until they discovered in 1879. And I've seen this at the British Museum in London.
Oh, wow.
It's called the Cyrus Cylinder. And it's a piece with an inscription that talks about Cyrus' decree, where he just literally says, hey, peoples from other lands that are captives, go back to your land. Wow. And it's incredible how it points to and confirms what the Bible said for so long in prophecy, but also in historical accounts. That really happened.
Yeah, because people read this stuff in the Old Testament and they just think it's just stories. But wow, it's so incredible. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite ones, and this was a recent one in 2005. They call it the Megiddo mosaic that they discovered. And this thing dates to the 2nd century. So it's 1,800 years old.
Wow.
And it has the inscription that Jesus is God. So we see already that 200 years after Jesus, the Christians, the very early Christians, worship Jesus as God. And this confirms just what the Bible says, because many people have speculated that, Jesus wasn't really worshipped as God. He didn't really claim to be God.
Made that up later.
Yeah, they added it in later. But this is concrete proof that the very, very early Christians, first generation Christians, already worship Jesus.
And the Siloam pool was another one.
Yeah.
I think it was discovered in the 19th century, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in John chapter 5, it has this random details of, there was a man that was lame at the pool of Siloam, and that pool in Jerusalem that has 5 porches and so forth. Said, why is so much detail? And this kind of detail that no one could verify. Everyone thought it was symbolic.
Yeah.
The 5 porches, and John is writing some theological book.
Yeah.
Some spiritual thing.
What does the 5 pillars mean?
Yeah, the 5
pillars,
equals grace or something. But when suddenly they just found out, just recently they dug up the Siloam pool, and it
matches the description.
Exactly, every detail, even 5 porches, physically they're still there, the remains in Jerusalem to this day, confirming all this. And there's many, many more things that people thought the Bible was just making up. And again and again, it's been confirmed. Confirmed details that only eyewitnesses would have known from that lived at the time of the events.
Okay, what about some? We know obviously the gospel writers in the Bible, but what about people who wrote about Jesus's life that wasn't Christian?
Yeah, no, for sure. And we have, I think, 2 of the biggest sources from the 1st century is Josephus and
Tacitus.
Yeah, right. That's right. I always forget his name, how to pronounce it. But Josephus, I want to read a quote from him.
Yeah.
And this is incredible. He was a Jewish historian from the same time of Jesus, and he confirms the crucifixion of Jesus. And not only that, and he also talks about the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
Look at this. It says, this is what he said. About this time, there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. Wow. Well, again, right here we see people believed he was God. For he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. And when upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate, confirming all those details, who was that guy that condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a 3rd day restored to life. For the prophets of God had foretold these things and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared.
Wow. Yeah, confirming so many details about the crucifixion, about Pilate, and about what the Christians believe.
Exactly.
Yes.
The resurrection and stuff.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, let me read you a quote from Tacitus.
Okay.
This guy was a Roman historian, one of the most revered Roman historians of all time. Okay?
Again, another perspective, 2 different perspectives from non-Christians that don't agree with Jesus.
And he also lived in the time of Jesus. Okay.
Right.
So he wrote, this is very old English, okay? Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, this is now Jesus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our prosecutors, Pontius Pilate. And the most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular.
Wow. Definitely, it doesn't like Christians, huh? But he's still confirming things from the 1st century, from the time of Jesus, Pontius Pilate, the crucifixion, and so forth.
Yeah, so it's not only Christians and the Bible confirming this Jesus and his life, it's actually the enemies.
Wow. So what
Yeah.
does this all mean for us? What is the conclusion of everything we looked at today, would you say, Johan?
I think a definite conclusion that we can draw is that the Bible is historically accurate and that we can trust what was written in it. It wasn't changed through, hand-me-downs and translations. We know who wrote it. We know when they wrote it. They wrote it in a time where people would have called them out, whose people were there.
Yeah.
So that is absolutely incredible. But the next step we have to take is, now that we can know that the Bible is trustworthy, let's look at what the Bible and the Gospels actually say. Who Jesus was. What did Jesus say about himself?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that's what we got to look into. So let's read the Bible ourselves.
Yeah.
But I really encourage you to join us on our next video, where we're going to explore who was Jesus really? What did he say about himself? And was he really the Son of God? It's a crucial question. We will see you soon. Thanks for joining us.